Well, in chapter 39, in Joseph, and Joseph was brought down to Egypt, to Potiphar's house. We last left off in chapter 38, little parentheses there, sort of little things happening. We focused on Judah and just his part, just what God was going to do through the line of the tribe of Judah. But we have Potiphar here. Potiphar is an officer, or some of your translations might say eunuch, and it means officer, and eunuch and officer are kind of colloquial, used that way interchangeably. It's sort of like years ago when I asked some people after church, I said, hey, can you pull over to the liquor store on the way home after church on Sunday? And they did. And I got out of the car, I went into the liquor store, it says liquor store, I walked in there and I'm looking around and I'm like, there's only liquor in here. The attendant at the store goes, well, what? Yeah, you're at a liquor store. Yeah, well, where's the bread, the bologna, the mayonnaise? I want to bring home some lunch meat stuff. And they go, this is a liquor store. I know, liquor store. See, it's odd for some of you guys here, but see, I grew up in an area, Southern California, a liquor store meant like super America. It's a convenience store. You just went to the liquor store. When Christians are talking after church, after Sunday, going to the liquor store, they're really not going there to get liquor. But these folks thought I was going to get liquor. The amazing thing is they took me there. I said, so you didn't say anything? You thought, I mean, I didn't know, but they're like, we were just kind of wondering, Pastor Chick, why you wanted to go to the liquor store. After I go, please, by all means, I just want to let you know, I am a Christian and I don't get a pass as a pastor of you not being said something if you see something going on in my life. And so here, Potiphar, this word eunuch or officer is going to be used interchangeably there. So he very well could be a eunuch, because oftentimes pharaohs made men eunuchs so they wouldn't mess with their harems, or they could be trusted. Some, we know from the New Testament, have made themselves eunuchs. Or he was an officer, or it was just one of those colloquial things right there. But this officer of the Pharaoh, this ancient Hebrew word again, and he's captain of the guard. If you're underlining, or on your iPads there, you can do a highlight feature. If you're underlining, understand this, is that he is the captain of the guard. This is either his secret service, his most trusted guard, or he's the sheriff in town. But he is going to be very trusted by Potiphar here. Look at verses 2 and 3. Here's the interesting thing, again, that you need to underline as we're going to learn anything here tonight. That the Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. That's what you get. And it doesn't matter. Look, and the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. We've seen that there's many other things that you can go through in life. And I want you to understand something. There's not going to be any difference of a situation that happens. A 10-car pileup on the highway happens to Christians and to non-Christians. It's just, who is the Lord with? How is he leading and guiding and directing your steps? I don't really title messages. I mean, this is chapters 39 through 41. But for tonight, I would just say the calling of God, the will of God, the direction of God, the equipping of God. This is what we find out here. And this is a key verse right here, that the Lord was with Joseph. And that's by far, hands down, that you have got to be sure of whatever decision you make that is often, well, the decision you make that is life-changing, is the Lord with you. Because if he's not with you, you're going to make some decisions that aren't going to come out well. And then you're going to, well, as I say, create an excellent opportunity for the Lord to do a miraculous thing. And he can be working every day in your life if he is with you. So that's the thing that you have to ask first and foremost. Is the Lord with you? We often, again, will complain that we're in a terrible or a difficult situation, or trials and tribulations come. But again, they come to, as Jesus says in his teaching, we'll get to in Matthew on Sundays, but that he causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust, and he causes the sun to rise on the wicked as he does as the righteous. And we're going to see here, because the Lord was with him, that he was a successful man in the house. That he was a successful man, as we're going to see here as you read through chapter 39, that he was prosperous. And this master saw something, that the Lord was with him, and he agreed with it as well. And they saw that he was being blessed. Something was different in Potiphar's house. Before Joseph shows up, maybe the management of the house is so-so. Maybe it's not really prospering because, again, this isn't just this captain of the guard. It isn't like he lives in downtown Cairo. There's plenty of farmland all up and down the Nile Delta River there. And you live, your home, your casa, your villa is further away from, I guess, your workplace there. And you might not see him, or he's this captain of the guard who goes out to battle or whatever. But anyways, you raised a lot of your own substance. Everyone had, a family farm was that. You were feeding your family. And so, again, there's a lot of things that are being produced here. And so something notable had changed. So there it is, Christian, that the Lord needs to be with you. And the second of all is that you're prosperous and God gets all the glory. Don't touch the glory, don't touch the gold, don't touch the girls. Or for you girls, don't touch the guys. But understand the 3 G's. Don't touch the glory of God. And we see Old and New Testament all the way through when people took the glory of God upon themselves. They're robbing others of the blessing, and they're taking it upon themselves. And they're working out these things in their lives. And that's the whole thing, is that I've seen people who've come here who in my 30-some years of being a Christian, I've taken people, I've discipled them that have no ability to work whatsoever. And the first thing that I needed to help them do in life is get them addicted to a paycheck and get them going that way. Sometimes guys will come to me and they'll say, well, I'm really thinking about getting married. And I said, hey, nothing sexier than a paycheck to a wife. I'm like, why? He says, well, because gravity's going to win in the end and everything's going to fall and all kind of stuff like that. But you got a paycheck, she can smile at you. Paycheck, good. And so, really, what about love? Love's good. But the Beatles even said you can't buy my love, right? So you understand that. I love your loving gives me a thrill, right? But your loving won't pay my bills. I want money. Okay, I've dated myself on that one, kids. All right, so we understand these things. And so here, that there was something notable and different, and that should be the same way for you and I as believers. Whatever work environment we go into, that there should be some difference there. There should be, because this company, look, take a side note or make a little note off to the side. Why do you even work at the place you're doing? Why do you have the employment you have? Why are you even existing? See, we're going to talk about God's will tonight. We'll all talk. Hopefully you'll listen and take notes. But understand this. Why do you even exist? Did God create church so He'd give us something to do and where we could go and maybe make friends now and then or whatever? Well, church is obsolete then because now we have Facebook. We don't need church anymore if that was the only purpose. And so understand this. If we needed some guru, we needed some way to be financial wizards and stuff like that, then we don't need a savior. We've already got Donald Trump, don't we? Do you understand? Look, God didn't create the church to keep us busy. The church is how God sends out and to reach a lost and dying world. But understand this. What is your purpose for even playing at the place that you're working at? We're going to see this in Joseph's life. And so look at verses 4 through 6. We see that God blesses him. He made him overseer of his house. And all that he had, he put under his authority. This is sometime, Joseph's probably 17, maybe 19 years old, 17, 19 years old, by the time he goes to Potiphar's house and he's sold to him. And, sometimes you read the end of chapter 37, you go to that parentheses in 38, and then all of a sudden, boom, Joseph shows up at Potiphar's house. It takes some time to travel on those camels. It takes some time to go to the slave market. It takes some time. So there quite possibly could have been a couple of more years. If you've read ahead, you know by the time something really awesome happens with Joseph that he's 30 years old, and the Holy Spirit doesn't write that in the Bible just so you can have a point of reference or whatever, but there's a purpose for that. But he made him overseer of his house, that he put all under his authority. It would have been easy. It would have been easy for Joseph to write off his present position, that he was a slave. He could have had a real negative attitude. He could have just done the minimal. He could have said, look, this is a bad situation. And he could always, my brothers rejected me. All these things happened. And he could have that, I'm just mad and fighting angry of the world. If there's anyone that I have learned this statement from, it's Joseph. You're here now. You're here now. I have been in life and death situations, and people that I'm with are complaining about the life and death situation, how they don't like being there. I'm like, we're here now. The plane's on fire. We need to go. You understand? We're here now. When that great successful plane landed in the Hudson River, people get all upset. I knew I should have got on this plane. I hate this airline, something like that. Really, get in the crash position. You're here now. And so here's Joseph that I see in his life, and we're going to see him also do this with his brothers later on. He made him overseer. He didn't have that negative attitude. He didn't have that thing. And the Lord blessed again, we see this Egyptian's house. For whose sake? For Joseph's sake. We even see that in unbiblically or unyoked marriages, or biblically unyoked marriages, in the sense of that a believer with a non-believer. There's blessings that happen that pour out onto that entire family because of the believer. And it just pours out. And I've seen wicked, pagan, heathen men stay married to their godly wives because they see the blessing. They want all that, but they don't want to partake of salvation themselves. And I've had husbands even tell me that, well, I'm not going to divorce you. You can't divorce me. You're a Christian. They know enough of the Bible to say that you're supposed to stay with me. And you can't divorce me, and you shouldn't divorce me. And they look at those verses there. And I have wives come to me, well, what about that? And I go, well, it's true. And then that wife goes, well, and I go, you're here now. You're here now. What do you do? What do you do when you tell someone you've just led them to the Lord, but their loved one just died moments or days earlier, and then they come to that realization, oh, my loved one's not in heaven, but that's where I'm going to. You're here now. So Joseph, it seems some 11 years is going to take pass. And for 11 years, he left all that was in Joseph's hand. And we see that Joseph was a handsome in his form and his appearance. And he took special note. We see that also. We've seen the same problems are going to happen with David and Absalom as well. But when you look at verses 7 through 10, his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph. She said to lie with me for 11 years. From everything that we get from the scriptures here, for 11 years this was going on. And every time, and it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men in the house that were there within. And she caught him by the garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. Look, it took more courage and bravery to flee. No one in the house. Who's going to know? You know, the devil only has 3 plays. And this is one of them. Well, who's going to know? You know, it's often things that you'll see. There's a show, I think it's on Friday nights, called What Would You Do? And the news station puts on these situations to see what the public would do if they would get involved and whatever. And would they get involved, you know, some horrendous scene or whatever it is. It's just, what will you do? And I like just watching it to see what people will do. I can tell you this, the older generation gets involved. The younger generation, not my problem. I mean, that's what I see. The news program doesn't even really bring that out. They're just putting situations there. But I see an older generation, and I mean, I'm talking 60s and 70s older, still have things like, hey, I've got to say something or do something or get involved. The younger generation is not. And we even see that. You know, when you've watched movies or you've seen that great movie, Titanic, not really that great, I'm being sarcastic, but even in that movie Titanic, what was it? Women and children first. When you read the news accounts of men who ended up on the docks with these other women who were saved on the boats, like, and other men, why did you? Couldn't this been given more space to other women and children who died? There was men after who were rescued from the sinking of the Titanic who later committed suicide by the droves, folks, because they were so filled and guilt, shame. Why didn't they give up their seed? Why weren't they? You had men like J.J. Astor and of the Astoria building in New York. You had other guys who You have the band. We're talking band geeks, flute players, violin, but we had the band go down with the ship. And yet you read 100 years later, not even the recent sinkings of ships in Italy and in the Greece and stuff like that, but 100 years later, you have people in the seacoast of Greece where another cruise ship went down. Everybody got off, but one of the things that was commented is that men were just fleeing and getting off. They were leaving women and children and all that kind of stuff. And they were interviewing. This is 100 years later. So is that 1915. So we have 100 years later. We have that. Not even that. It's about 75 years later. I don't think that was about 75 years later. Was this is that they're interviewing these men. Why didn't you let them get up? And he goes, hey, they want equal rights. They want the right to vote, to work, to do this, take a man's job, do all this stuff. They want to be a man. They can go with the same consequences as well. And you're just like, wow, what a mark. What a contrast of not even 100 years later. So I'm telling you this, to have this pursuit all in, and you know Job's got to work a way out to not be in her presence or whatever. The other thing about the women of Egypt, they were known to be very promiscuous. They were known that, again, whether her husband was a true eunuch, and this was just a ceremonial wedding or a marriage or arrangement, or he was away on long visits or trips or whatever for the king, for the Pharaoh. Either way, that she was setting these things up, and it was known around. She said to lie with me. And this, again, we see this temptation. And it's not unique to anyone else. 1 Corinthians 10:13, if you're taking notes, tells us that no temptation is common unto men. No temptation has seized you except which is common to all men, but in every instance, God will provide a way out. Years ago, when the Metro Transit bus, that corner where our coffee house is, that used to be a bus stop. And I can tell you countless times of guys who were on it's the bus number 64 now, but would be on the 15 or 16, would be going by Sojourner's Cafe on their way to do some sin, buy drugs, do whatever. Typically it was buying drugs, and Lord, just help me out. And one guy in particular just tells me that he still went ahead and bought drugs and got high and got arrested. But he later that day when he got bailed, he says, man, I was just praying for a way out. And the bus just stopped. No one rang the bell for next request. The bus just stopped, and the doors opened up right there in the corner. And I was like 25 feet, and I'm in that door of Sojourner's Cafe. Big open sign is on. He says, man, you were there. The doors opened up. And I was like, Bus driver's just kind of looking around. No bell. Go. Bus was there for like about 30 seconds. He's like, shh, door shut, and he goes. He says, yeah, God always provides a way out. Here I was, and that's when he realized I was just like, God, just, if you love me, just provide a way to God. If there was only a way, I can't believe I'm going here and I'm doing this. Meanwhile, it took 2 transfers even to get on that bus to get down to St. Paul and to get there, but he was really committed to the situation. God always provides a way out. And sometimes it's just, shing, run. Sometimes it's just leave. And you just got to go. And that took the courageous thing. That took the bravery thing here. And Joseph, and his faith was known. And look at this thing. How can I do this great wickedness? First and foremost, against God. David sinned, and it's a great example because we identify David sinned with Bathsheba. Nathan the prophet confronted him, months and months later. He said, you're that one that I'm talking about. It's you. And what was David's prayer? You read Psalm 51. You read David's prayer. Against you and you alone, Lord, have I sinned against. Well, wait a minute. I think you sinned against your own children. I think you sinned against Bathsheba. And definitely putting Uriah to death. I think that's a sin. Because of your sin and your sin alone, first and foremost to God, listen, Christian, because first and foremost your sin against God will cause the consequences to be played out in everyone else's life. There is no victimless crime. There is no victimless sinful thing. Everyone pays. You sin and you blow. Let's just take a common thing this week. We don't have to do a survey, but understand how many things kept you away from maybe service tonight. Maybe those who are going to listen later online. What kept you away from service tonight? Maybe you did something. Maybe you just, I can't go. I feel guilty, but whatever. And you're not here, but yet you could have been here to pray for somebody. You could have met somebody's need. You could have done those things. Your sin does not just affect you, it affects everyone else. And likewise, look at Joseph and his relationship with the Lord. How can I first and foremost do this great wickedness against my God? And second, and that should be a second, man should be second, how could I do this wickedness against my master? He's entrusted everything into my hand. Notice what he did not do. Well, you know what, I'm a slave. Everything I do, my master gets credit for. I mean, I don't get wages. I've been bought. I'm a slave. Everything that I do, that I prosper in, that God prospers me, blesses me, it blesses my master. But also everything that Joseph's doing, that God is blessing him, what is it? That blesses everyone else on the farm as well, don't they? Everyone else is getting ministered to. Everyone is putting stuff. The master's putting everything in his hand. He refused. And that great wickedness and sin, again, we see that against God, but secondly, and so you look at verses 11 through 12, he resists this overt act of lust. And she caught him by the garment, and basically he ran out in his skivvies, ran out naked. There's naked, or just fully bodily naked, as my friends in Texas said, then there's naked. See someone running around in their underwear, that boy naked. And we do that. That boy ran out naked. And he did that and left his outer garment there, and he fled and he ran. Just like 2 Timothy 2:22 says, makes it clear, to flee youthful lust, to do those things. James tells us that if you submit to God, to resist the devil, submit unto God, and what will happen? The devil will flee from you. And that's the first and foremost, is submitting yourself to God. We see verses 13 through 18, she falsely accuses Joseph before Potiphar. He came home. So again, didn't she for years, I've got to have you. I've got to have you. Lie with me. All the seduction, I've got to have you. I love you. I want you. I need you. Oh, baby. Oh, baby. Oh, baby. And in one instance, now she's turned around to where she can lie, and she can be hateful, and she can be spiteful. Well, we see that as well with Jesus, don't we? One week, people are saying, Hosanna in the highest. Well, that's our king. That's the Messiah. 1 week later, what are they yelling? Crucify. Folks, be careful when again, Proverbs tells us, be careful when men speak well of you. Let another man praise you. Not your own lips, but be careful when everyone's just saying, way to go, way to go. So what we see here. Well, here's something interesting. Potiphar's the captain of the guard, most likely in charge of the jail. Speculation, but seems good foundation to base that on. But he's in charge of plenty of guys, and he knows things. This is a punishable by death. You understand? You could put a slave to death for anything. They were slaves. They had no rights. You found any displeasure in him whatsoever. What does he do? He puts them in prison. We're going to see some things later that gives me a conjecture or suggestion. I don't think Potiphar really believed his wife, but what's he going to do? If he doesn't believe his wife or doesn't do something about him, or maybe he doesn't believe her, but yet he's going to put her in prison, and that kind of sends a message to everybody else. A lot of speculation here, but this should have been a punishable by death offense. So you look at him. Look what happens in prison. Same thing. The master of the prison, again, all right, puts everything. Look at verses 21 through 23. He prospers in prison. You know, the devil's going to give you an opportunity to let you complain. It's just to let you complain. You can complain about situations, and you can say, okay, I'm here right now, and then all of a sudden, and then you can start thinking about your rights. You're going to start thinking about all the things that you have done for God, and, you know, why are you in this situation? What are the things going on? Understand this. Joseph's never seen God. Jacob has. Abraham has. But Joseph never has. Isaac's had an encounter. They've all had this encounter with God. Joseph's had a few dreams, and he's had what we believe to be that Holy Spirit. We've had that sense and that all. But he doesn't have the testimony his dad or his grandfather and others do. And he has this whole thing. So there's a guy that you would think, whoever had a situation where he could complain, man, you have got it really bad. But the Lord was there. Look at that verse again. The Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy. If God blessed him in the pit, he blessed Joseph as a slave, and it's not surprising for us to see him being blessed in prison. None of these terrible, terrible things, and they are terrible, I'll agree with you that, did it ever allow, and did it understand this, it did not derail God's plan for Joseph. Joseph hung in there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was successful, Genesis 39:2. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord had made all he did to prosper in his hand, Genesis 39:3. The Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had, Genesis 39:5. But the Lord was with Joseph, verse 21, and the Lord was with him, Genesis 39:23. This is the thing that you and I, that we need to understand over and over again. Is number one, is that the Lord is with us. The Lord is with us. Go with me to chapter 40. We see in chapter 40, and it came to pass after these things that the butler and of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against the two of the officers, against the chief of the butlers, and against the chief of the bakers. We don't know necessarily what's going on here. We don't know necessarily what the plot was. We assume quite possibly there could have been a poison plot or something like that, because of the butler, the chief cupbearer, and the baker, some type of food thing or whatever. So we see these things that go on here. And it came to pass, and he put them in the ward in the house of the captain of the guard into prison, in the place where Joseph was bound. So we see that through verses 1 through 4, that they were put there. What a coincidence! If you're taking notes, coincidence really isn't a kosher word. Something's going on. They're of that royal family. They're of that. And we know that Potiphar, I believe that Potiphar has something to play in this. And so he's there, the captain of the guard. And everything he did, he prospered. And he said, look, whatever's going to happen in this prison, if anything goes wrong, you're going to be responsible. If it goes right, I'm responsible for it. You understand? That's what he's able to do. He's able to look, I'm going to put everything. So you're in charge. So look at verses 5 through 7. And we see there's some concern. Verses 5 through 7 of chapter 40. Why are you so downcast? Here is Joseph. You're in prison. You're a slave. You've been falsely accused. Wouldn't there just be a time to say, I really don't have time to invest in anybody else's life. I'm really bummed about my situation, and so I really can't get involved. I don't have the time to get involved in other people's lives. But we don't see that in Joseph's life. We don't see that in his nature. We see him that they're truly downcast, and he says, well, what's up? And he invites them to tell them they're disturbing dreams. What's going on here? Well, do you really want to know? Well, that's why I asked. I mean, oftentimes people say, how you doing, chick? And I said, well, you want the truth or what you want to hear? And I've actually had employers tell me what I want to hear. Good. It's all good. People say, no, really, how's it going? Well, I got this rash, and can you take a look? Or can you put this cream on my back? I mean, they're just kind of looking at you. Do you really want to know? Do you want the truth or what you want to hear? And oftentimes when people say, so try that sometime. Try that and say, hey, how's it going? Tell them. And they're like, I got to go. Well, then why'd you ask? Because you're supposed to say fine. I've had people tell me that. You're supposed to just say fine, everything's good, and move on. But it's not. And then I start to follow them. Do that. One or two things will happen. One, they'll turn around and be concerned and pray with you. Or two, they'll never ask you again. And therefore, you don't have to talk to them anymore. But either way, what happens? It's a win-win situation, right? We see here, verse 8, I really want to know what's going on. Tell me. And look what Joseph does. He tells them that God can interpret the dreams. It's not me. It's not me. It's God. I mean, he had an awesome or an excellent opportunity. Verses 9 through 11, we see here that in chapter 40 that he had an opportunity where he could have taken the glory. He could have taken the glory. He could have touched it and said, I can do this. But yet, what does he do? His whole testimony is that of that they know this is the Lord that's with him. And then people agree. That's the thing that we have to do here, that we need to do here in the Midwest. Because there's a lot of good people in the Midwest if we're comparing good peoples with good peoples. But there has to be something. Not that you're wearing the T-shirt or you're holier than thou or singing spiritual psalms and all that kind of stuff and just making yourself look weird that way. I mean, I do that. But weird for weirdness' sake. But there's got to be something genuine. It's like, again, my trip to Kuwait and stuff like that. Being able to tell that story 100 times over. Or someone asks you a question. Or what's going on in life? What are these things happening? And you're able to tell them. Because when people come and ask you for your advice and counsel, one, that's got to tell you something. One, that you're respected. Or two, you're a gossip and they like talking to you. And you've got to make that decision and discern that really quick. Because if you don't like people gossiping to you, and they come to you and they gossip to you, you know why they come to you and gossip to you? Because you listen. But if you're no longer going to listen, but if you're truly there to listen to them and say, how can I help and be involved, then that's why they need to be coming to you. So he interprets these dreams, verses 12 through 15. And he talks about these three branches. And again, you've read ahead. We know that the butler, the cupbearer, the butler, his turned out in 3 days. Now look, if you're going to get vague, but understand how clear this was and how he had to say it was the Lord. When you say, thus saith the Lord, when you say God's interpreting these dreams and this is what God told me to do, we're going to find out if it's God, Satan, or the flesh. Whenever I have a conversation with someone and they interject, well, the Lord showed me, well, I'm not going to argue with God. And then they want my opinion. I said, well, I'm not going to argue against God. I'm not going to argue with God. That's what God showed you. And then all of a sudden, you got to get them to back off that statement that God showed them or something like this, or maybe this is what they said. But anytime and again, if you're taking notes, I call it the God clause. Whenever someone interjects the God clause, there's no conversation. why would I want it? You say, well, I don't know, how is that? How about when someone comes to you and they ask you for counsel, advice, or something like that, and then they say, well, Chick told me this, and all of a sudden you go, well, Chick told you that, and I told you against what Chick just said. First of all, no one can ever tell you Chick said. One of the things that I do when people ask me for counsel, advice, I said, I'll counsel, I'll advise you stuff, but the last thing that you can do is go and tell anyone that I told you this. I'm going to lead you to the Scripture. You find it on your own. This is what I would do. This was something. If what you're telling me is true, then you go and you do this. But don't say Chick said. But that's the whole thing. But people, and I'm just a teddy bear of a guy. I mean, I'm just this little guy. But how much more so, then people get freaked out at that, when someone says, well, God showed me. All right, well, then you need to do it. That's why when people come to me premarital counseling, it's my favorite. Well, God showed us we're to be married. So if you don't, he'll kill you? Do you even like each other? I mean, is this a forced marriage? Is God forcing you to do this? I'm like, well, no. I mean, do you even like each other? Well, yeah. Isn't that great? I mean, that shows me the character of God. God often leads you in the things that you actually want to do. Someone comes to me, God wants me to drink vinegar all day. You didn't have to give yourself away. But but if you say, thus saith the Lord, well, I'm not going to argue with God. Seems odd to me why I don't have you to do that. Well, here's the thing. Joseph did not have an encounter with God physically like his dad and grandpa and all these others. And so here, he tells the vision, he interprets it about the baker and the cupbearer, and what happens 3 days later? That's exactly what happens, to the T. Now, here's the other thing that we see that I think Joseph does that's kind of what you and I do. Hey, can you remember me? You know, can you enlarge these things? I'm not asking that you go, and he tells the butler, says, now look, you saw what's happened here, right? When this comes to pass, don't forget about me. Remember, God's the one who gave this dream, but remember me. Remember me. You know, what do you think would have happened? Again, you've read ahead, right? So you know, it's no spoiler alert here, but if you haven't read ahead, Joseph, we're going to see another couple years goes by before he gets released in a miraculous way. But if he was remembered, I mean, just think about the possibilities that, what do you think Joseph would have done? I don't know. You get out of jail, my family, you go home. You find your way back there. I mean, we know you're in jail because before you go to jail, we have a going to prison party. And when you get out, we have a getting out of prison party. That's just my family. And so the thing is that you go home. What if he was released? You see, the sin that was perpetrated upon him, God's going to use for his good. He's not going to turn it into good, but he's going to use it for his good. And we know the end of the story because you get with Joseph, because all of the world, of the known world, all the lands are going to come to Egypt. And it's just like your sin is never private. It will disturb the flow. Someone else will miss out because of our disobedience. But how much more so when we're obedient do people get blessed? Let's not just you and I look at the Scripture here from a sinful point of view and look at all the things that we're not doing right. Let's look at the successes, the ones that if we do the things that are right, how many more are going to get blessed? How many more people are going to benefit? The Apostle Paul tells us in Philippians that for me to die is Christ, to die is gain. I don't know whether to live or to die, to be apart. Like he had a choice. I mean, it seems like there's an implication that he had a choice that he could have left. I would have left. But yet he goes there and he says, but if I am to remain here, listen up, Christian. If you are to remain here, why? See, there's a call of God. We see that in Joseph's life. We're going to see the will of God. We can see that through the pit and through the prison and through stuff like that. But now we're going to see the direction of God upon Joseph's life. And we're going to see that equipping that happens. We see the direction that God is continually leading him. But here's that whole thing. If he would have gotten out of prison, he most likely would have gone home. Then there would have been a whole different story about, his brothers being found out. Maybe they would have killed him before he'd come back or whatever. I mean, they're like, hey, we can't. How many of the murder mysteries do we see that someone, finds out that they're still alive, so they have to go and try to kill him now for real or something? And so that's quite possibility. But if that would have happened, then the rest of the story that we've seen in Genesis. Now, understand this about the book of Genesis. The first 11 chapters is all the pre-Abraham stuff. Then we have a small section of Abraham. But now, from this point on, it's all about Joseph, and what God is going to do in Joseph's life and minister to you and I. So here's the thing that comes down for you and I, folks, is that Pharaoh had this dream. It comes to pass. He gets it interpreted because the butler goes, now I know my faults. Some 2 years later, in chapter 41, some 2 years later, they're having a party's going on, and the Pharaoh has this dream, and none of the magicians, and that's who you used to go to for direction. Magicians, tea leaf readers, astrologers, you go to all them, and they would plan out your life and do those things, and they could not answer this dream for him. They were totally stumped. We're going to see about the direction of God, that God works all these things out in his providence and his sovereignty. He works all these things out. But here's something else. Remember when Joseph, when he was 13 to 17, and he has those dreams? And what does he do? The way he blurts them out, it was good medicine, but he delivered it with a rusty needle. And now what do we see in Joseph's life through this calling of God, through this direction of God, through this will of God? What do we see now in his life? You know what? God is the one who's going to interpret these dreams. We don't see him coming off with this youthful zeal anymore. Hey, look what God showed me. You're all going to bow down and serve me. Check out something else about the dreams. It seems like they keep coming in these patterns of two. And they're meaning the same thing. Joseph's getting this now. And so here, this butler remembers and says, look, hey, Pharaoh, I remember, and, remember the reason why I was in prison, and how could I do this? And understand from this butler's thing is that, look, because of his failure to remember this, do this at this particular time, understand this, God's not going to get derailed. I really believe, my conjecture, I really believe God kept him in prison for 2 more years. Well, we're going to see the outcome of that. But there's some more equipping going on. And I think that's what was happening. So there were some finishing touches. Joseph was not ready to be second in the line to Pharaoh at the age of 17. But some 20 years later, he is. So we see this at the age of 30. This is what's going on. So we've seen quite possibly some 11 years or more has transpired. We see that Joseph is sent for. He's called, shaves him up, brings him to him. He comes before Pharaoh. And again, his answer gives peace. Now Pharaoh, he's supposed to be the sun god Ra's man on earth. He's supposed to be Ra on earth. That's the Pharaoh. He's supposed to be... And now look what Joseph does. He's not politically correct. He's tactful in what he's going to do. But everyone knows now, before the Pharaoh, do you think the Pharaoh's going to see him blind? He just says, tell me, he's getting shaved and cleaned up and stuff. Let me tell you about this guy. And he interpreted these dreams, and he did these things and all this kind of stuff. And he's getting to know a little bit about him, quite possibly because I believe that Potiphar is right there. Potiphar's also telling him the same thing. He gives this interpretation, and he lets him know it is God who's the one who interprets dreams. The God that has brought me through all these things. Through being rejected by my brothers, being thrown into a pit, being sold into slavery, to be falsely accused, to be thrown into prison, and even here. And that's the thing about faith with rear view mirror image or sight of it. It always has hindsight, always has 20/20 vision. But here's the thing that in Joseph's life is just, it was never, God, why'd you do this to me? My God, why have those forsaken me? He looks at here and he sees through all this because of his response. He can see the call of God in his life more clearly now. He can see the direction of God in his life. He can see the will of God because now we can see how he's administering and letting him know who's doing these dreams instead of coming out when he's a young kid. Hey, I had these dreams and you're all going to bow down and worship me, and everyone's going to, this is going to happen. Well, that's just what I dreamed. And yet we see this. And what does Pharaoh do? All the way up to verse 37. And Joseph even tells him, here's the plan. See, that's the whole thing. What's your plan? So that's the other thing that we see is, what's the plan of God in your life? There's got to be a plan. You weren't just created to be rejected by your brothers, thrown in a pit, sold into slavery, put into prison. What is the plan? Folks, I can tell you about the plan of God, the will of God, the calling of God, and we're going to see here the equipping of God in your lives, that he just doesn't have you working where you're working at. Those people next to your cubicle or whatever, or wherever you work, school, or play, that they're not just there by, because we just have to. God did not create the jobs and work so we could fund the IRS. That's not the purpose of work. All right? God did not put you in the place that you have. He does not have you where you're here now so you can be miserable about it. And the thing is that if we do look at ourselves and what about me and oh, poor me and all this kind of stuff like that, then who around us is missing out? Who are we spending our time with? Who are we investing in? Who are we praying for. It's why I have those slips back there in the back of the table. Just there's 6 spots for you to put someone's name down and to pray for them this year, for them to come to know Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord, or to come back to the Lord. Someone who's local here. You know, it is easy to pray for our missionaries all over the world because they're all over the world and I can pray for them. But someone who needs a jump start, well, I used to say in March, but it doesn't work anymore. But let's go back to January. Someone needs a jump start at 2 in the morning. Well, I'd rather just put you on my prayer card. Can't you be all over the world? And that means I might have to do something. I've got a car, I've got a battery, I've got jumper cables, and that means I might need to do it. You see, we see this promotion, and look, if you're going to cross-reference this, if you're faithful with the little things, what's going to happen? You'll be faithful in the greater things. Joseph needed to be equipped. And through that equipping, he went to a pit, went into slavery, he went into prison. I think he's pretty well-rounded. I think he knows how to deal with mankind now. I think he's known about it. Hey, folks, maybe you get into the Batman trilogies and all that kind of stuff. But what did Bruce Wayne do? He wanted to find out the criminal element. So what did he do? He just went down to the criminal element. But the movies play out, right, Lauren? They play out that he really wasn't stealing from Ward Industries because he owns it. So he wasn't stealing for himself. But he wanted to get to know the criminal element and all that. And how do they think? So he can, do battle with them later. That's just man's interpretation. God is the great equipper. Listen, if you're taking notes, he does not call the equipped, but he equips the called. And when you're called, hey, here's another one. Romans 11:29. For the gifts and callings of God are irrevocable. Are irrevocable. Let me give you some things, just trying to encourage a believer here today. You know, I had given to them, just needed some encouragement. And I gave them Jeremiah 29:11. I have to often put that at the end of my text messages or emails because emails and text messages don't convey any feelings or whatever. And I just use them for purely technical reasons. But Jeremiah 29:11 tells us the plans that I have for you are good. They're not evil. That's God speaking to his children. The plans, the thoughts that I think about you are that way. Or Romans 8:28. You know, I'm preparing for this message today, and this young believer who's just having some struggles. And I said, just read these things. These are right on my phone, folks. Romans 8:28 as I'm preparing for this message tonight. Because we can see Romans 8:28. For what does it tell us to do? Does anyone know that one by heart yet? Anyone want to shout it out? For God works what? For the good? All things. No, some things. It's the Ronco Bible, right? All things. It tells us that he works all things for his good, who are called according to his purposes and his will, right? It doesn't say that he takes your bad and turns it into good, poof, hocus pocus. But he uses it all for what? For his good. For his good. 1 Corinthians 15:58 tells us that you always be immovable, be abounding in the grace of the Lord, knowing that what? Your labor is what? Not in vain. Well, guys, you guys know some of these right here. And then Romans 2:4. I had to throw this one in. Romans 2:4. For it's the kindness of the Lord that leads us to repentance. Huh? See, here's all these encouraging verses, but I'm sure this guy is just like me, that he might have complained a little bit, so you need to repent. After you read all these verses, and yes, it's the kindness of the Lord that leads us to repentance. And so, folks, here we see in Joseph's life, in chapter 41, that again, that these 7 years of plenty, again, have come to pass, and we see that they're going to, now the famines, verses 46 through 49. We see that God changes, or Pharaoh changes his name to Asenath-Paneah, right? It either means God saves, or he who saves. And that is that we see that type of Joseph being there. We've seen that he has given a wife, not a bride. I'll get to that point in a little bit here, that he has this wife, and he's here in Egypt. And then he has these 2 sons, and his name, the firstborn, is Manasseh. This means to forgetfulness. Look how he names his children. And he doesn't give them, this is a Gentile wife, but he does not give them Gentile names. He gives them Hebrew names. Forgetfulness. Not to forgetting all my past, but forgetting all that evil, forgetting all that wrong, forgetting all those things. And then his second son, Ephraim, he names fruitfulness, because God has doubly and fruitfully blessed him here. C.S. Lewis writes in The Great Divorce, He described hell as a place where no one forgets anything, remembering every sight, every cruel exchange of words, every wrong ever done to them, and everybody is utterly unforgiving. But in heaven, all these things are put away because all things have become new. It's a great passage there in C.S. Lewis. He made me forget. I had that experience. I mean, I've had that experience spiritually in the Lord, and I had that experience when my granddaughter was placed in my arms for the first time. And I looked at my kid and I said, boy, I can't remember one bad thing you've ever done. And then later he took his daughter out of my hands and I said, I'm remembering everything. This is total contact. As long as it's there. It's not like a gas tank where you fill up and can drive for some time. It's electric train, baby. I got to have connection. I remember now. And the further you get away with her, the more I remember. But bring her back. I remember nothing. I know nothing. See, these are things and these choices that you can make. And so these things, they come to pass. And then the famine comes. And what happens? It ends there in chapter 41 that all the known world, all the lands come to Egypt. Why? Because Joseph was obedient, folks. Because Joseph got equipped. Joseph understood the plan of God. He understood the will of God. And he understands the call of God in his life. So the calling, the will of God, the plan of God, and then you need to get equipped. You need to be prepared. It's a remarkable picture of Jesus Christ. Let me just go through some things here, this type of Joseph and Jesus. He was a shepherd, was loved by his father, sent unto his own brethren, hated by his brothers, prophesied his coming glory, rejected by his brothers, endured unjust punishment from his brothers, sentenced to the pit, delivered to the pit, though a leader knew he should go free. Sold for pieces of silver, handed over to the Gentiles, regarded as dead, but raised out of the pit, went to Egypt, made a servant, tempted severely, but did not sin. Did we not just discover that on Sundays in Matthew chapter 4 with Jesus? And he did not sin. He was tempted severely, falsely accused, made no defense. That's the other thing. It's surprising that Potiphar is being charged and is falsely accused. No defense. He was like a lamb being led to the slaughter or a sheep before the shears, made no noise, did not redo it. Cast into prison and numbered with the sinners and the criminals. Associated with two other criminals, one pardoned and one is not. Again, here's another interesting thing. The butler, the cupbearer of the wine, and the baker, the bread and the wine. Folks, I won't go that far, but my mind was just going, and I started studying all those things wherever you see bread and wine, and we see that in communion. We see one was condemned, one. We see the thief on the cross who says, remember when we come into your kingdom. We remember the other thief who says, just curse him. He showed compassion, brought a message of deliverance in prison, wanted to be remembered, shown to have divine wisdom, recognized as having the Spirit of God, betrayed by friends, glorified after his humility, honored among Gentiles while still despised or forgotten by his brethren, given a Gentile wife or bride, was 30 years old when he began his life's work. That's the interesting thing there in these chapters when it says pointed there, about 30 years old when he began his life's work. Blessed the world with bread, became the only source of bread for the world. The world was instructed to go to him to do whatever he was said to do by him. Was given a name, God speaks or he lives. Folks, that's just about 35 different things. There's hundreds of these things. You can go and I say Google online, look at the types. But the other thing is that he never ever complained. He never went down and why me. I can think of twice in my life that came close to God. It was one when my father, when I was told that he was going to die, and a year earlier, when I realized that, I believe the Spirit was showing me that, but the Lord assured me that he was going to come to know him as Savior and Lord. And then a year later, I get the call. I'm at my pastor's house. My mom has the number. I'm down in Oceanside and calls the pastor's house. I happen to show up there for a prayer meeting, and the pastor says, hey, man, it says, your mom just called. And I call my mom. She's like, hey, your daddy's in the hospital, and we haven't seen him. He's dying. You need to get here quick. Oh, man, like, what am I going to do? And I just began to just cry. I almost just like, God, you said he was going to get saved. And my pastor said, what can I do? And I said, well, my license is still suspended from drunk DUI and all this other stuff I did a long time ago. I'm a Christian now. He says, well, maybe I can drive you. And all the way from San Diego up to L.A. And this is all happening within a couple of minutes. And and he leaves the room to go grab his keys to give me a drive up. And in that second, God says, he's not dead yet. He just kind of talks to me that way. He's not dead yet. I'm like, yeah, he's not dead yet. I still got time to get up to LA. He's still got his time to the Lord. I went from 1 minute like, oh yeah, I got to get going. And just like that. And the same expression of my pastor's like, you okay? Yeah, I'm good. Just take me to the train station. I'm good. I'll get met up in LA. I'll get over there. I can't drive right now. So little issues with the government and the man. And in 1 minute, he saw me from just tears to like, and I'm like, oh, that came close. And the second time is that when my sister dies, like, But that's the closest but I've never ever, in all the things that have ever happened in my family's lives and others, it's never been God's fault. Because I was discipled early on, and I learned early on the calling of God, the will of God, the plan of God, and the equipping of God. And all these things in life did was prepare me for the next thing. And when bigger things came into my life, this is the conversation my wife and I have. After some big thing has happened, we look at each other like, oh man, I didn't think I could endure this. If this is just preparation for something else, I don't want something else. I've done that. Stop. I'm good. Blessings, I'm good right here. I'm good right here. Because I know if the blessings come, I know the attacks are going to come, but all that is preparation and training for something else. We see that in our lives, and I would ask that you would see that same thing in your own life. That you would see the call of God in your life. That you would understand the will of God in your life. You'd understand His plan for your life. And then you would just continue to get equipped because God is equipping you. God has not brought you to this place to work or you're getting a new job just to work so you can pay taxes. God is not bringing you to a place and a family and neighborhoods and things just so you can live your own quiet, miserable little existence. Proverbs 17:1 tells us a man, and this goes for women too, but mankind, man who isolates himself, what? Brings about his own destruction. How can you and I really go wrong if we invest our lives in the lives of others? You see, that's what I end with tonight. I know how to make all your problems go away. You just come to me and I'll give you that little secret. In fact, I'll give it to you right now. Take no thought of your own life and just get involved in other people's lives and help them out and minister to them. The reason why your problems will go away is because you won't have any time for them. The reason why you have problems, you have too much time for them. That's why my counseling load is low, because when people think they have problems, they want to come to me for counseling before they get there. I've seen people walk up. I'm there at the coffee house ready for counseling. I see them get on the car and there's people going. And they're just, I said, oh, that's the pre-counseling conversation. And I'm praying for them as they're walking in, and finally they get there, they go, well, and they go, yeah, I know what you're going to say. I got too many problems. I got time on my hands. I just need to get involved in other people's lives. That's easy. Now you just get to drink coffee. I see that walk. I've seen it plenty of times. You don't think it is, but I'm watching you guys. And sometimes people have an argument with me, and I'm like, whoa. It seems like there was an argument here, and I wasn't invited, but you already had it without me. Let me join. Don't be mad at me for a reason. You ever shown up to someone and they're mad at you? And they said, well, you know why I'm mad at you. Why? Well, you had an argument with me, but I wasn't there. Let me be here. Folks, joy. Jesus first, yourself last, and others in between. Joy. That's what it is, okay?